so happy that song is done. I can't get it out of my head. Like, especially when I'm trying to go to bed. Like, when I start thinking about that song, I just know that I'm not gonna sleep that night. And now I get to share that with you guys! Yay! So I apologize for the creepiness of that nursery rhyme. I thought I would refresh your memory in case you've already heard the Lizzie Borden song. And if not, and it's your first time, congratulations. You now know that Ring Around the Rosie is not the creepiest childhood nursery rhyme, even though it's about the plague and we're dealing with coronavirus. This is probably 10 times scarier than that, at least, because it is actually based on a real-life axe murder that happened in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1892. So today I'm going to be talking about the case of Lizzie Borden, who supposedly, even though she was acquitted, but we'll talk more about that later, by popular opinion, took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks when she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. I actually started my research on this case by accident, listening to my favorite true crime podcast, Crime Junkie, who presented the case of Lizzie Borden, which is kind of like the O.J. Simpson of the Victorian era in the most factual and organized way I've heard of yet. And the facts actually say that this trial says more about the role of gender than it does about the guilt or innocence of Lizzie herself. So today I'm not going to be trying to prove her guilt or innocence either way. I'm going to be explaining how gender norms and social status influence the case, how we see this in the media depictions from then and now, and the trick to getting away with murder in the 18th century: being a woman. Okay. So first, I want to give you the background on the family of this case, as it's important to note the social status of the Bordens, especially when we discuss women later in the trial. The Borden family consisted of Lizbeth, or Lizzie Borden, born July 19th, 1860. She was 32 at the time of the murders that took place in her Fall River, Massachusetts home that she shared with Emma Borden, her older sister, who was 42 at the time of the murders, Abby Borden, who was 65 years old when she was axed down in the guest room of her own home. Lizzie and Emma unaffectionately referred to her as Miss Borden, as at the time of the murders, they'd been feeling like, for years, not just now, that she wasn't a maternal figure to them, and she was just trying to inherit their father's fortune. Andrew Jackson Borden was Lizzie and Emma's father, who owned the house and the fortune. He was married to Abby, and he was 70 years old at the time of the murder. Andrew was very, very wealthy, and a descendant of one of the founding fathers of Fall River. Their family was described as well-off and reputable. They were wealthy enough to hire maid Bridget Sullivan, who was just 26 years old at the time of the murder, and the only other person in or around the home, besides Lizzie, at the time that the double axe murders took place. Now, of course, I have to talk about this specific media depiction that I just rewatched because I feel kind of fresh as well. So basically, Hollywood played on the fact that just Lizzie and her housekeeper were home. They had Chloe Sevigny, I don't know if I said that right, playing Lizzie, and Kristen Stewart playing the maid. And in this, they're kind of undercover lovers who committed the murders to hide their affair once Andrew and Abby catch them in the act. It wouldn't really be that problematic if there was any fact to that theory, but the truth is, it actually came from these Victorian-era kind of tabloid newspapers. And for years after that, Bridget had trouble with, finding a job, and Lizzie, alongside of her, faced a lot of harassment and just social judgment. I mean, I'm sure she already had that, because if your whole town thinks you're probably an axe murderer, there's some stuff that comes with that. But anyways, the norm of heterosexuality really hurt these people who were proved to be innocent in a court, and it's still the biggest part of entertainment on this movie, in my opinion. Something that kind of bothered me in specific about this movie when it comes to displaying homosexuality was the fact that the women in it didn't actually get together until they were united by both being sexually abused by men in Lizzie's family. Because this portrayal really makes it seem like their sexual identity is more about what men do, what men have done to them, than them just actually not being heterosexual. Now, in reality, Bridget was Lizzie's friend. She did confirm Lizzie's story about where she was and what she was doing that day, but she did admit some things that make Lizzie sound pretty guilty. She noted that the tension was always high in the home and that the family never dined together, which was extra strange for the times, for such an upper class and, traditional family, yes. She also confirmed a key detail that practically hung Lizzie before her trial. 2 days before Andrew and Abby were found dead, they were violently ill, and Abby believed they had been poisoned. Number one, who has the stomach flu and naturally just assumes they were poisoned? Obviously, the Bordens had enemies, inside or perhaps outside of the house. And number two, Emma was out of town, and Lizzie herself was the only one in the home not sick. Number three, just 1 day before the murders took place, Lizzie attempted to buy prussic acid at a local pharmacy. The pharmacist refused. At the time, it was also believed that if a woman wanted to murder, she would do it with poison, as any ladylike figure couldn't handle the gore or be capable of something as gruesome or physical as shooting or stabbing or, axing someone in the face. Although this key information wasn't allowed in the courtroom after Lizzie's dream team got it thrown out, somehow, likely because they had connections to the judge, it's important to note because of society's belief that due to her status as a woman, an axe murder would have been impossible, and without the details released about the poison, the case was significantly weakened once it was brought to the trial. Now, I'd like to get into the details of what the day of the crime looked like and how gender norms impacted that. First of all, I want to talk about the importance society places on emotional expression and how that really hurt Lizzie's case. Imagining the scenario, guilt or innocence aside, gender aside, your parents are dead. You just discovered the bodies, and now the police are in your living room, or parlor in this case, because upper-class Massachusetts. How do you think you'd react? That's the thing. You probably don't know. And even if you do, your reaction was likely different than the person sitting next to you. In reality, it's impossible to read someone's mind, and traumatic experiences affect everyone differently. It is quite possible, therefore, for the demeanor police felt was way too cool, calm, and collected for someone dealing with the tragedy was just a result of shock or denial for Lizzie, rather than an indicator that she didn't care. Regardless, her lack of hysterics was taken into account as unladylike, which villainized her. Gender polarization would see holding it in as perhaps appropriate for a man, because the role of a man, through a masculine lens, is to remain strong and show anger, if anything, rather than cry. Women are supposed to cry. Being emotional and expressive of it is a key trait of femininity. In a diagram, we see that femininity gives women more flexibility to express themselves, but in the end, men are seen as more powerful overall. And although the expectations of masculinity are more rigid, male traits are seen as more desirable in society. Now let's get back to the case. In the spirit of emotional expression and hysteria defining femininity, I want to bring up PMS, or more specifically, the perfect murder secret. So apparently, because it was improper to go through a woman's things, especially a high-class woman, here's an excerpt from the New York Times, August 6th. Police are acting slowly and carefully, no doubt to feelings of sentiment, because of the high social standings of the parties involved. During the first sweep, kind of due to that, they really didn't find a lot. However, Lizzie warned them beforehand that in the basement, there's a bucket full of bloody rags. But that was because she was on her period. The bucket, likely containing the garment thought to be Lizzie's day dress, as she notably was not wearing that day, was not further investigated or brought up in trial. According to Clue, my favorite period tracking app, for most of human history, menstruation has been associated with taboos and stigma. Menstruation has been seen as unbecoming and unhygienic, and treated as a disability, until women were needed to work in factories during World War II. But what is more disappointing is the fact we may never know if Lizzie did it, because menstruation was taboo. Now that we've got through the details of that period in the story, let's head to the trial. In the days leading up to Lizzie's trial, Lizzie stayed in a neighboring town's county jail. She shared private testimonies in court, and the judge felt she should be arrested until her official hearing in front of the jury. The media was very persistent in either completely condemning her or fighting for her innocence via characterization. On one hand, Lizzie had supporters. Lizzie was a Sunday school teacher who cooked meals for her church events, served on the Women's Fruit and Flower Mission and the Ladies' Christian Temperance Union. She was portrayed as pure and pious, and her cooking skills and hobby of teaching and gardening was seen as maternal. Thumbs up! Her innocence was framed using feminine traits. On the other hand, once the information about the poison leaked, the media was quick to persecute every action Lizzie took following the case. She was seen as cold-blooded and emotionless. Reporters even went to the funeral and wrote about Lizzie's attire, noting she was not wearing a veil and her dress was much too form-fitting. Their observations based on the material culture norms Lizzie was breaking and the personality they perceived took over public opinion. One thing her supporters did achieve, however, was a relatively fair trial. At the time, the judicial system and other agencies were all male. Women did not have voting rights, therefore could not serve on a jury. Lizzie's church felt due to this fact, Lizzie's trial could be unfair. Although it would take until 1898, 5 years after Lizzie's trial, for the first woman to be on a jury, the women's voices were heard and taken into account. The trial was moved to a town about 2 hours away to obtain a more neutral jury. Taking into account the widespread idea that women could not commit heinous crimes simply because they were women, the male jury probably served Lizzie well. It seemed Lizzie and her team had prepared for the room full of men. She was dressed very elegantly, carrying a fan in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. Her hat was embellished with cherry-colored ribbons, likely to make her appear young and womanlike, alongside her extra-fitted corset. During a reenactment of the Hatchet murders, in which the prosecution brought in the boiled heads of Andrew and Abby to show the wounds, Lizzie fainted twice. The combination of her appearance, tailored to the feminine ideals of the time, beautiful, pure, and innocent, as well as her emotions at the trial, worked. The all-male jury was said to have taken just 1 hour to agree Lizzie was not guilty. Additionally, it has been confirmed that they agreed within the first 20 to 30 minutes, yet stayed longer to appear like they were deliberating for a long time. Lizzie and her sister Emma were the sole inheritors of their father's fortune, as his will was suspiciously never found. Lizzie went on to be a huge philanthropist, challenging the motive that she was a greedy and gold-digging, as women are often characterized when they are villainized, probably because men are supposed to be the breadwinners, and a woman striving for independence challenges male dominance and female submission. I know I said I wouldn't try to convince you either way, but even as an ancestor of Lizzie, double related, my grandmother proudly states, I can say I fully believe Lizzie was involved, but the guilt doesn't fully lay on her shoulders. The jury, who posed for a picture together after the trial and supposedly gifted it to the Borden sisters, and the police, who found it improper to search a woman's things and were scared of period blood, were the ones who ultimately let whoever committed this crime get away with murder.